Hi everybody, Matt Lawton here, and this is the Astrological Winds channel. Going to take a look at the astrological weather report for the week of November 3rd through the 9th, and a lot going on this week, actually. We've got Mars changing signs going into Sagittarius, and it's going to be aspecting Neptune and Uranus and Pluto. We've got a full moon midweek on Wednesday at 14 degrees Taurus, and Venus very active this week and very sensitive, quincunxing Saturn, Neptune, Uranus, and going into Scorpio and squaring Pluto. Also, the week that Uranus slides back into Taurus, which I talked about in the monthly last week, and I'm not going to go over again. And it's also next Sunday is when Mercury goes retrograde again, which I'll actually focus on more next week. There's so much other stuff going on this week that's what I really want to focus on this week. But a little business first. The Astrological Winds channel is a free video blog that I do on YouTube. And if you have a YouTube account and you like what you see, I would love you to become a follower. That would be really cool. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so that you know when I post the blog. I also like to remind people the blog is still available on podcast. The exact same audio as the video is. It was on podcast long before it was a YouTube channel. Just look up Astrological Winds channel on your app for podcasts, and you should be able to find it on at least a few of them out there that you pick them up every week off of Buzzsprout. And that way, to me, that like frees you. Like, you don't have to really watch the video if you don't have the time to do that, and you can be like, driving to work or whatever and get a chance to listen to the podcast. So, I think that's really a great benefit of that. And if you have an Instagram page, the Astrological Winds channel does have an Instagram page too, where I do post the link to the blog on YouTube every week. And always can find it on my website, www.astrologicalwinds.com. There's a tab on the top for blogs, and not only is this week's blog there, but there's weeks and weeks of the ones from before, including the monthlies, including the annual, so you can check any of them out. And also, that is where you can check out all my professional services. I've been a professional astrologer giving professional readings for over 20 years after 7 years of training. My menu is there. And I'll go into more details on that at the end, but just check that out. I can work with you on that, do all kinds of types of readings. So, all right, I'd like to get into this week. So if you remember, like last week, I think it was Wednesday last week, Mars trine Saturn, right? And Mars moves a little bit slower than Venus and Mercury and the Sun. So it's not until today on Monday that it catches up to Neptune and does the trine to Neptune. And so that's a nice actually energy. Mars, is all about, our motivation, what drives us, what makes us take actions. That, has a lot to do with our movement, a lot of what we're doing every day. And when it gets together with Neptune, it slows down that energy, right? And when it's in a trine, it slows it down in a very harmonious way. And what I like to say, I've given this analogy before, if you've heard the blog, when Mars and Neptune are working in a harmonious aspect together, it's kind of like the slow, harmonious release of energy that, like, say, yoga or Tai Chi has, this kind of really gentle, flowing energy like water, not resisting, but moving in a gentle way. So a lot of times, like any kind of slow movement stuff, obviously for our body is really good for us under that energy, like yoga or Tai Chi. Hey, and this also can spark up motivation, interest in our spiritual life or our spiritual journeys. If we have something like that going on in our lives, it can really motivate us to maybe, take some actions in relation to that. A lot of times too, like, we will work for the benefit of others. We're into like serving others or helping others, whether that's our friends or whether it's like, group things or charitable activities, working with large institutions for a lot of people, things like that. And it also is like a time when we're kind of like what I call like almost a little bit conservative in the way we approach things. Mars is usually very like active, like me energy going, and Neptune diffuses a lot of that energy. And so what to me it kind of pulls back a lot of like what we may be really strong about a lot of times and kind of get a little bit conservative, and that's through detachment actually, um where we can kind of feel like we can get along with less in life, and it doesn't feel like it's something that's less. Actually, like it's almost like simple is better because it's easier. And then on Tuesday, Mars will go into Sagittarius. Okay, so Mars in the fire signs is always very expressive because Mars is a fiery planet, right? It's the red planet. And when Mars goes into Sag, we are super motivated by our ideals, what we really believe in. And because Mars has a lot of energy, we will put energy into that, into pushing our ideals. We will work to try to get that out into the world somehow. So it's not only that too. I'd like to use the Mars and Sagittarius. Another one of my analogies is like the guy who's at like the point of the light brigade. Like not only wanting to go out and motivate over ideals, but like be willing to be the leader in action. In action, like I'm going. Like this is one of those ones like people can sit around and talk about the things they want to do. This the Mars and Sag is like I'm doing it. I'm already out there doing it. You guys can keep talking, but I'm out there doing it. Now, what's really interesting, when you think about this, it causes people to act, and it's causing people to act on beliefs. So I think these next 2 months or so, while Mars in Sagittarius, and those of us who live in the United States, and maybe those of you who live in your countries too, where we're seeing such a divisive energy over the beliefs, this is going to just make people want to act on it. Like they're reaching a point where people are like willing to act on like their beliefs. They feel like, they can feel like, wow, I've really been pushed to do something, and any kind of restriction energy, people are going to go try to, see their way through it. They're going to be really like into pushing through it. So it's a very independent and freedom seeking energy. So people are not into being restricted at all when Mars is in Sag. Now, interesting too, because both of them have to do with sports. Mars in Sagittarius is like, for someone who's into athletics or sports, this is kind of what they call being in the zone. It's like that in the zone energy. So you can bring that energy to anything that you're activating on. And, Mars and Sagittarius, a lot of times, like, it likes to spend a lot of times outdoors doing adventures, things like that. So you can be, in the zone. But, we might see some athletes or maybe some teams in the next 2 months do some amazing feats of ability, because like that is an energy that will be more prevalent than it normally is. But Mars and Sag, gets really attached to the ideals and beliefs, right? And that's the main thing. We have a very strong sense of what we think is right, what we think is just, and what we think is moral, and we're willing to go to battle for it. And so but for what we believe in, we are willing to try to push it. So this is going to be a really interesting time for the United States, and in particular this week, because we are really at an apex point of the division. Mars immediately opposes Uranus on the same day, Wednesday. Well, that is just really explosive energy. That's like, lighting a match to like, gasoline or something and having some conflagration just blow up in front of you, or it's like a bolt of lightning just shorting everything out. And it's really the energy of rebellion, Uranus. And look how much that plays into the Mars in Sagittarius, which is already feeling very individualistic and freedom seeking. So, what I think, we're going to see a lot of this week is people really striking out against who they can perceive as their enemy. It's going to be very impulsive. It can be very chaotic. It can be very unstable, with individuals acting out, trying to create changes right now because of what's going on around them. And so there's these explosive releases of tension, that can happen in the world this week. And think about that in your personal life too, because it's very much that's how you or others can act out. But not only is it something social, but what it's showing is people have really reached a point of restlessness that they cannot take it anymore, and they really feel like they need to do something. So it is very impulsive energy, and even if we can somewhat control that ourselves, it doesn't mean the people around us can. So we may get sucked right into it anyway, or we can even get sucked into like some wave that's been created by society or some event where people are just in general in groups feeling held back and are acting out together. But this is a time when we're definitely more willing to make changes to the direction of our life, and that can happen really, really quickly. People want to call their own shots now more with Sagittarius and Uranus energy, and when they get resistance from others, they are ready to go to battle. The battle lines will be drawn quickly, and so like this is very explosive energy for any kind of disturbing places in the world that are already in that kind of energy. It can get very explosive, and one of the things too on a personal level with this can bring sudden bodily disturbances, like where you suddenly may need to get some medical attention really quickly for a for something that comes very rapidly. So be aware of that too. That you don't get yourself to this point of like, whoa, I'm like so stressed out, like my body just reacted to it in this really negative way. And then the week ends on Friday for Mars with a sextile to Pluto, which Mars and Pluto are similar. They're the higher and lower octave of what motivates us. Mars is like kind of like things to just survive, really, on in a physical level, and Pluto, it represents more the subconscious drives to just keep the race going, literally the humanity as a race going, and the things that drive that energy, which is why there can be a lot of sexuality involved in the Pluto kind of energy. But when we have these two together, like it's the lower and higher octave are working really well together, and they're creating opportunities to bring changes to our life. So what may all this go through is like, yeah, we may see some things where like, yeah, this is a place where I can, change some of my goals, redirect some of my goals, and maybe change some of my objectives based on what I see going on around me. And it's a great time to connect with groups, actually, who have similar goals. This really allows people to work together cooperatively on that. They're very motivated, once again, by what they believe in, and we will assert ourselves under this energy, either individualistically or even as a group. Really like want to push this energy. We're very motivated to do that, and we're effective too with our actions with this energy too. The energy comes out harmoniously. So what we do is not only very effective in the present, but has far-reaching results for the future too. But you have a very clear understanding of what our objectives are, a clear sense of purpose is a good way to say it, and kind of like we give off an air of assurance, and the world reacts to that, and we many times can reach to what we really want to get to. Then Wednesday we have the full moon in Taurus, which I try to hear. There's not a lot going on with connections to other planets because it's at 14 degrees of Taurus, and the only aspect it's making is a sextile to the North Node at 15 degrees of Pisces. So remember, all the planets, for the most part, at the beginning or the end of their signs. So this being right in the middle, the moon's not making any aspects to Taurus. But as I've always said before, what is the full moon? It's when the sun and the moon are in opposition to one another, right? And so there's tension between the will, what's driving us, the sun, and our emotions. And we'll feel this in our private lives and in our public lives. It'll almost feel like many times they're in conflict with one another, like they're, trying, it's very difficult to balance them, like they're almost going in different directions. And a lot of times when there's a full moon, you'll notice people can take this very me versus the world kind of attitude, and that's what it is. There's a struggle going on within ourselves, and then it's being reflected out in the way we go out in the world. And what does that affect most? Many times our close relationships are very stormy under a full moon because we're dealing with emotions. So the moon in Taurus really wants stability, wants reliability in the sense of materials and physical resources and needs being met. That is really what Taurus wants. It wants to make sure that our basic needs for food, shelter, healthcare for ourselves and for our loved ones are being met. And it wants to know that there's a regular rhythm to that. There's a big connection. It's an earth sign, right? And the moon is very strong in Taurus too. It's exalted in Taurus. So like it really likes to be there because the moon is very rhythmic too. But part of rhythm is knowing that you're gonna have things when you expect to have them. So like that's what stability is to Taurus, and that's what it wants in its emotions, emotionally to feel good is to have that stability. And that's a difficult thing right now. Obviously, the world is going through a lot of turmoil with resources, a lot of turmoil with finances and money and markets. And especially for most people, maybe where it's really affecting a lot of people. And so it's hard to feel that right now. And this full moon is really going to shine a light on that. It's going to be like, wow, there's not a lot of stability here, and that can trigger some deep emotions, and in all honesty, Taurus is not very comfortable with the super deep emotions, and that's why the opposition to Scorpio comes in, because Scorpio, that's what Scorpio sun wants. It wants a really deep emotional connection with anything, whereas Taurus is like, that kind of stuff can interfere with the security of basic need and survival. And so, like, it can feel like that is a threat, the deep emotions to that. And so, like, Taurus can be very conservative and traditional in that way, because it wants to make sure it has those things. So it can feel very threatened by this need of Scorpio to have this deep emotional connections, to have these raw emotions to showing out. Like Taurus wants to hide those raw emotions, whereas Scorpio's sun is putting them right out there for everyone to see, And so, like, it can be really difficult sometimes for people to understand each other under this full moon because the Scorpio energy can get people really resentful. It can get them really upset inside. They can feel vengeful. They can feel like they've been betrayed, and so it can be really touchy for relationships. So look to where 14 degrees Taurus and Scorpio are in your chart, and you'll know which houses they're in, and that for the relationships that have to do with those houses, things that have to do with those houses in your life are probably going to be the ones that feel this full moon the most. Okay. And the sextile to the North Node is good because I think it gives us a solution to some of these problems we're all facing, or many of us are facing right now. And that is that coming together with others is a way to get the stability we need. That's exactly what that's saying. So we have to have the right attitude about it for sure. And we have to, but making connections over security there's going to be opportunities out there for that under this full moon. So, look for that in order to get security, not only for yourself, but for others in hard times, because the North Node is about connecting with others in groups, with people that you have common destinies with. So that's a place where you can find some relief from this energy. And then the last thing I really want to talk about this today and this week is Venus's journey this week. And I'm going to be flat out and be really real about this. This is going to be the most difficult part of the week, really, even more difficult than the full moon and the Mars Uranus. And it's very intense, the journey that Venus is going to have this week. And what does that mean? It means that relationships are really going to be tested this week. Once again, money things, financial things too. But, Venus is gonna, relationships that are shaky right now are gonna have a really hard time this week. Venus is always tested this time of year when it goes into Scorpio, and I think I mentioned that when it went into Libra, a few weeks ago, when Venus makes the initial connection and it's all charming and graceful, and that's always the beginning of a relationship, how it can be like that, and then we get into Scorpio a little while later, and it's the natural progression of the relationship to get into deeper and intense places. So that's what's going to happen, and then it's going to aspect all these outer planets very difficult in difficult ways. And that starts today on Monday when it's quincunx Saturn. Okay. That's the first thing that Venus is going to do this week. And this is a really difficult energy to handle in relationships, because basically people are feeling inside like they're not getting what they need in relationships. Okay. Or they're giving too much of themselves, like there's an imbalance in the relationship, and it's very difficult to feel this, because like you feel like you're not getting the love and support you need. And what's really sad about this, what happens when this happens, because people have a tendency to shut each other down under this energy, is we shut down inside emotionally, and we can get really cool towards one another, like cooled off, like non-emotional, hold in what we're really feeling. And then when we do have to give some energy in a relationship, it actually can come from a place of resentment. We can feel really lonely and abandoned inside. And people who are close to you, unfortunately, many times the ones who trigger this energy by somehow rejecting you and making you feel unworthy, or it feels unworthy, and so like I said, the other thing about this is it is saying, yes, we need to be conservative with our resources right now, with like this full moon in Taurus, and that it can be very difficult to manage them right now. They can be very restricted. Obviously anyone who's on the SNAP program is feeling that right now. But this can even restrict our energy, because we just shut down so much, our creative energy. We just shut down so much that we just feel like, we can't even get anything out anymore. And then on Thursday, Venus goes into Scorpio, the sign of its detriment, which means it's very, it's not comfortable in Scorpio in the sense that, like, in a traditional way. And it's because deep emotions are being triggered once again in relationships. And what's being triggered many times has been unseen or subconscious to us before this. So all of a sudden, this relationship that, that was going along might all of a sudden be bringing up things that, prior to this, but we had stuff down in the subconscious. And like I said, the difference between Taurus and Scorpio is going to be like, this is coming up. I'm not going to allow you to hold this down. It's going to come up. So this can make people feel really intense emotionally inside, and it can get us into literally what we call love-hate relationships with others. We can get very possessive of our loved ones, try to manipulate them, either secretly, or even openly into open battles. Trigger things like jealousy and all the seven deadly sin type stuff. And the thing is that's funny about it is what Venus and Scorpio really wants is a deep relationship emotionally, is someone that they can trust emotionally, is someone that they can feel really close to, the kind of relationships that can last forever, right? But we have a hard time even telling people that, expressing that, because we're afraid of being hurt. We're afraid of being betrayed, afraid of being rejected in some way. So relationships get really complicated for the next few weeks while Venus is in Scorpio. And a lot of people are going to have misunderstandings with one another. They're going to, feel like their feelings are being hurt by one another. And remember, you always are the ones to choose whether your feelings are hurt. No one can make you feel a certain way. But what I think is good about Venus and Scorpio is that it helps us to really realize who our real friends are, who we can be really loyal to. But once again, as far as finances go, this can bring up some really fearful energy around not getting our needs met financially, or feeling like, things are out of our control, that kind of thing. Now, we can, on an artistic level, take a lot of these really intense emotions that this brings up and channel them into some really intense pieces of work and art. Things that we can get creative with, we can get really, really deep with, and that's a good way to channel some of this energy. Now, what we got going on also is the quincunx at the end of the week to Uranus and Neptune, and that's going to be straddled over Thursday and Friday, and that means it's forming a yacht again. And as I've said over and over, finger of fate, something that's very fatalistic. And this one with Venus means it's relationships once again that's going to be driving things. And that's one of the things about relationships that we all need to learn is when we enter a relationship, we then become at the whims of what that other person does. It affects us. So this can mean that the yacht is being driven by what other people are doing that we can't really control, that we just need to ride along with and respond to. And this yacht between, Uranus and sextile and Venus can be very sensitive to others. The people are super sensitive, can take things the wrong way, can get very obsessed about things or streamlined about a way they see a relationship or relationships in general, kind of have a really even maybe odd or particular way of relationships, or seeking out what they want in relationships, even what they want in love. So, once again, this, it can make us feel really mixed up inside about relationships. Part of us feeling like we want to break free. Part of us knowing that if we break free, we're going to miss the energy of whatever that relationship is. And part of us realizing that, the relationship is unreliable, it's unstable, it's undependable, and that you really should be seeking out your own freedom and self determination. But when that's overdone, people can get really irresponsible in relationships. They can break promises. So it's not a steady energy. It's very unstable. It's a time when people really need to examine what their attitude is about love and relationships and realize that they may be stuck in some past emotional patterns that maybe they adopted from their family, or some other past emotional issues in their life, and then they're triggering that now, and it can make relationships now very disappointing. It's really hard to have an objective view of relationships with this energy. It's, we're trying to reach some ideal that may not be reachable is a good way to say it. And I think really one of the biggest lessons here, and it's a hard lesson, is to realize that all our relationships, none of them are permanent. They're all fleeting on one level or another, and that we just really need to enjoy them for what they are in the moment, and kind of let them go otherwise, because if we don't, then we're sticking on to things from the past that start to affect them now, and it can jeopardize them. It can hurt them, and so I really think this yacht is a lot about an opportunity, even if it's through a difficult thing, like whatever it may be in relationships. Even through a difficult thing of learning that um, that we have to just like you know best way to say this is like, if we don't let go of the old patterns, like they're gonna be what destroy the relationships. But like at least we can get that insight through whatever's going on now. And I think that actually will just lead right into the last thing, which is Venus squaring Pluto. Now that's also gonna be tough. That's gonna be exact on Friday, and Pluto being the co-ruler of Scorpio, the sign that Venus just went into, and feels really, you know, strongly intense in, this can bring complete destruction to relationships if we're not careful with this energy. If we don't handle this energy well, they can completely break down and just be completely destroyed, and so unfortunately what happens with Venus Pluto is people try to control one another. They really try to, like, instead of allowing the changes to go through because they're so intense, they instead try to control one another. And that's what ultimately can really destroy the relationship. Really, the only way to deal with relationships this week is to accept the changes that are happening in them if you want them to stay alive, because otherwise you're going to get into a battle mode with people, and most likely it's going to destroy whatever's left of it, will disappear. So I really think, you have to accept some of the changes going on and look at some of this stuff deeply, like how you are reacting to relationships, and purge some of those attitudes that you have that may be based on past things or even family or whatever, that are not really helping your relationships now. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of really brutally, honestly looking at yourself to do that. And it's not an easy thing for most people to do these days. People would rather project their problems onto their others. So, it's not an easy assignment. Now, just quickly, like I said, Friday, Uranus retrograding back into Taurus. So, once again, how fitting is that with the full moon in Taurus? And all this Venus energy showing that finances are in a really intense place too right now. It just fits right in because, as I said last week, Uranus and Taurus, what has it been for 7 years? Complete instability with resources and finances. So that just shows we're going to have an intense, but a few more months of that, probably into the spring. And like I said, I talked more about that last week on the monthly. And then Sunday, Mercury will go retrograde in Sagittarius. And I'm going to get into that next week because that will be one of the main things for next week. It's going to go back to its conjunction with Mars also during that retrograde period. And then next week is also, I talked about it in the monthly, Jupiter also goes retrograde next week. There's not a lot of other activities, so I'm going to save the Mercury retrograde for next week and sign off now. So just to remind all of you, this is a free service. I would love you to pass the link along to somebody else right now. If you want to give any kind of currency donation, my Venmo is at the symbol at Matthew with 2 T's hyphen Lawton, Lauten, Cash App, $ Matthew Lawton, all all one word there with no hyphen. No amount is too small. Thank you so much for those of you who do give and have given. Many of you have given over and over. And I really appreciate that. Just those small amounts can really help. It does cost me to do the blog. And remember, if you need a reading for your birth chart, if you've never had one done by a professional, I would love to do that for you. It's so different than getting a computer readout or trying to figure it out in a book or having a friend who dabbles. It's so much more holistic, and it never leaves you. Your chart's always with you. Invest in all these other things. Invest in yourself. And then every year around your birthday, I really recommend getting a predictive reading so you know what's going on for the next year for you so you can work with those energies. But check my website out, www.astrologicalwins.com. It has my menu for all types of readings that I do. The prices are there. I can work. If you can put half of it up, you can do payments over another month or two if it's too much for you. And all kinds of different other readings too, relationships, elections, all specific questions. So check a look at the website on that, because that's really the best way to support me. So thanks again so much to all of you. Next week we'll look at that Mercury retrograde. This is Matt Lawton. This is the Astrological Winds channel. I'll see you then.